has written an article for our journal on how good neighborly relations became part of EU enlargement policy and the problems associated with it. Elena, how did good neighborliness enter debates about EU enlargement?
All right, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. Well, good neighborliness is a very, very important principle in international law, and it is based, I would like to give just a short introduction about the roots of the principle, because I believe it's important. It is a very important principle, as I said, in international law, which is based on the core principles of the UN Charter. Well, now we do have the EU, which is in a way obliged by virtue of the treaties to respect and to promote international law in its foreign relations and in all relations actually with the wider world. And the EU actually borrowed this principle from international law. It did enter EU arena actually as an accession condition in the enlargement with the Central and Eastern European countries. Obviously, the EU did not want to import any bilateral disputes in EU, and most importantly, border disputes and minority issues. Over 100 good neighborliness agreements were signed at that time under the framework of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. However, the EU did not tie the progress of these states to the implementation of the agreement. So more or less they're just that letter. So we do not see implementation, but then there is a reason also for that. In the case of the Central and Eastern European countries, we did have horizontal disputes which were not that problematic. And when I say horizontal disputes, I mean disputes among states, countries, Central Eastern European countries with the same status.
So we're not in the European Union yet, so yeah.
Sorry?
So you mean between countries which are not inside the European Union yet?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So only candidate countries, or not even candidate countries, third states also, but not member states, because once we do have a member state involved in a dispute, we are not talking about a dispute between states with different status. Once we have candidate state on one side and member state on the other side, because member states, of course, in the enlargement process have the upper hand. They are unequal before the law, because obviously member states are part of the process of making the law for us. So we do have a very, very different situation with the Western Balkan countries now, which are most of them involved, in some kind of disputes with member states, or have a good potential to be involved in such disputes.
And you talk in your article particularly, of course, about the two most well-known examples, namely the dispute between Slovenia and Croatia, and then, of course, the dispute between Greece and Macedonia. Mm-hmm. But you're saying that you see potential for much more. So how broad or how relevant is this issue beyond those two most prominent cases?
Well, these were, as you said, very well known, and this is why I just talked about these two disputes, but they're just example of what we can expect in future, because if the principle is not applied in accordance with international law, which requires respect for sovereign equality of states, and in a sense detachment now from the enlargement process of all these disputes, we're going to definitely face a problem, because we do have quite problematic countries in the Western Balkans. We do have many disputes or issues, even if they do seem maybe insignificant, they may become, of course, a very big issue for the enlargement, and especially now after Croatia is in, what can we expect, for instance, with their relations with Serbia, or afterwards with Kosovo and Serbia, Kosovo, I mean, or with Bosnia. So we do have definitely a problem if we do carry on to implement the principle in this way.
So in a certain way, you're highlighting a paradox that by trying to resolve bilateral disputes, the European Union, before membership, the European Union is actually encouraging these disputes to become part of the accession talks, or to be used in the accession talks to block countries, and as a result are actually harder to resolve. Is that in a certain way that paradox you're getting at?
Well, the thing is, I don't believe that the EU had any bad intention when introducing this principle. The principle was translated into a condition. So I don't think the EU had any bad intention. I think the main goal was to avoid all these disputes and not to have any problem when these countries become part of the EU. However, it's not the EU, it's the member states who used the principle and, I must say, misuse sometimes the principle, not to respect international law as it provides, but to, in a way, obviate their legal rights under the principle in the enlargement process. Because the enlargement process is a great field where they can have the upper hand and not implement the principle in accordance with international law, but in accordance with their national interests, which is very much against the principle.
So is the conclusion, I mean, you quote in your conclusion Dmitry Kochinov, who says, law and politics often have their different lives and priorities, and they don't always harmonize perfectly. And you're highlighting, of course, a legal principle and then its political reality, which is quite different. Is the conclusion of your study to say that maybe good neighborliness should be taken out of the accession process, or how else could you see this principle maybe come into a less dysfunctional manner into the accession process?
Well, the principle is very much in accordance with the EU demands, I would say, even not so much against conditionality, because the EU is obliged, as I said, to promote international law and thus to ask for settlement of these disputes, because the principle is based on settlements of disputes. However, what we see in the enlargement process is not settlement of disputes in accordance with international law, as it should have been. And since this is the reality, we do have to detach these disputes from the enlargement process and, as stipulated by the EU, to send them in front of some other judicial body or international court, whatever, arbitration or whatever. However, they have to be detached from the enlargement process in order to see promotion of international law in the enlargement process. Otherwise, we only see promotion of national politics, which doesn't work and which is very much not in accordance with the common interests of the EU to spread peace with its enlargement policy.
Well, thank you very much, Elena. I think there's a very useful contribution there to think about how something which is good, seen as a positive principle, and I think nobody would dispute the benefits of good neighborliness, but how it's in a certain way been put on its head in many ways, and actually has been used to promote bad neighborliness in many ways. And I think this asymmetric power relationship is, I think, one very important point you've mentioned. And I think, as you rightly said, there's a lot more potential conflicts which we don't yet know about, or which might be minor, banal even, but which might be important enough for one member state to invest significant political capital into. And certainly this is something to be keeping in mind beyond the cases you mentioned. So thank you so much for the interview, and thank you so much for the article.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure. Thanks.